The room was quiet. Too quiet. Harry lay on the creaky mattress of his leaky cauldron room, one arm behind his head, the other resting on the closed cover of a well-worn notebook. Sunlight leaked through the crooked blinds, striping the floorboards in pale yellow lines. Outside the window, Diagon Alley was waking up. Faint footsteps, the rattle of carts, the scratchy cry of an early owl, but in here, the stillness pressed down on him like a second blanket. He hadn't moved in for over an hour, not since running away from the Dursleys after blowing up his aunt, not since riding the night bus through the crowded London streets. His enchanted notebook lay open beside him. He wasn't sure how to tell Hermione what had happened. He knew she would scold him for his rashness, but what else was he supposed to do? He could handle the Dursleys because he just needed to wave his wand in the air and they would leave him alone. Marge, on the other hand, it was too much. Drunk, smug, waddling through the house like she owned it. Her words had always been sharp, but this time they'd pierced something deeper. Filthy blood, she'd said. Weak blood. His mother, his father, reduced to dirt under her boots. So he let go. Let the magic rise and swell, hotter than it had ever felt. He didn't even use his wand. She'd floated up like a parade balloon, face purple, legs kicking, teas spilling. And Harry hadn't felt guilty. Not a single ounce. The only thing he felt uneasy about was what was going to happen to him. He used magic illegally and not in the best way. It's one thing to use Lumos to read at night, but to inflate your aunt. He's for sure done for. He thought the Ministry would blast his door down as soon as he cast the spell on Marge, but the night bus had arrived instead. No auras, no handcuffs, just that massive purple bus shrieking into view and Stan Shunpite grinning like it was the most normal thing in the world. And now he was here. He sat up, pulling the notebook onto his lap. The page was still blank. He thought about writing something, but before he could lift the quill, there came a knock at the door. Harry stood stiffly, brushing his fingers once across the notebook before moving to open it. Tom, the leaky cauldron's hunched innkeeper, gave a toothy grin. "Sorry to disturb, Mr. Potter. Minister Fudge is here to see you. He's waiting downstairs. Said he'd like a word. Private." Harry's stomach sank. So this was it. The Ministry had come to expel him. He nodded once. Thanks. He followed Tom down the crooked staircase, heart pounding. The pub was still quiet. Just a few early risers sipping tea in the corner. Fudge sat in the back parlour by the fireplace, his green bowler hat in his lap and a cup of tea steaming beside him. He looked smaller in person than Harry expected, more nervous somehow.
"Ah, Harry, my boy!" Fudge stood quickly, forcing a warm smile. "So glad you're here, yes. Very good. Please, sit. Harry sat down slowly and folded his hands awkwardly on his lap. There was a long pause between them. The minister cleared his throat. "Now, Harry, I know the last few days have been stressful, but I want to assure you, you are not in trouble." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Even though I used underage magic?" Fudge chuckled lightly. "Ah, yes. Well, under normal circumstances, certainly. You'd be looking at disciplinary hearings, maybe even expulsion, but..." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "We're dealing with a more urgent matter, a threat that requires our full attention." Harry narrowed his eyes slightly. He already didn't like where this was going. Fudge continued. "There's been an escape from Azkaban." Harry blinked. Fudge's tone was calm, but his fingers twitched on the brim of his hat. "The prisoner is dangerous, very dangerous. We're coordinating an international search, but it's delicate. The last thing we need is panic." "What's his name?" Harry asked. Fudge paused just a second too long. "It's not important. What matters is that we are acting swiftly and with complete discretion." A name flickered in Harry's mind. Sirius Black. Stan Shunpike had mentioned it on the night bus. Muttered something about how he'd escaped. Harry sat a little straighter, heart starting to beat faster. "But I'm not being expelled," he said, keeping his tone level, "because you don't want people looking too closely at Hogwarts. Or at me?" Fudge's smile thinned. "No. It means we're prioritising public safety and yours, which means you get a temporary free pass." Keyword, temporary. Fudge said, adjusting his cuffs. "You'll remain here at the Leaky Cauldron until term begins. The Prophet has been told not to bother you. You're free to walk Diagon Alley, just don't leave it. And if anything unusual happens, anything, report it immediately." Fudge adjusted his hat and leaned back, clearly hoping the subject had been closed. Harry stared at him for a long moment, then glanced at the fire crackling behind them. "You keep saying it's not important, that I don't need to worry, but I remember last year, people said the same thing then, and my friend nearly died because no one wanted to see what was actually happening." Still no answer. Harry exhaled through his nose and sat forward. "You want me to pretend I didn't notice? Fine. But at least don't lie to me about what's already happened." He reached to the side and picked up the Daily Prophet, its edges soft from being unrolled and re-rolled too many times. He didn't even look at it this time. He already knew what it said. He let it unfurl across the tea table between them. "Hogwarts Headmaster cleared in chamber incident" by Rita Skeeter. In the aftermath of a dangerous magical disturbance beneath Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the Ministry of Magic has concluded its internal investigation into the events that led to multiple student injuries and one fatal attack on a school pet. According to sources within the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, the disturbance originated from a neglected structural enchantment tied to the school's ancient wards, the result of magical build-up and poor maintenance of obsolete protective runes. Minister Cornelius Fudge stated in a press release, "Our findings are clear. This was not an act of terrorism or dark wizardry, but a tragic combination of flawed castle magic and the overexcitement of students meddling where they should not." Fudge added that the school will remain open, and Hogwarts headmaster Albus Dumbledore, while advised to strengthen his internal disciplinary processes, will retain his post. Rumours of an ancient creature, sentient diary, or heir of Slytherin are being dismissed as schoolyard hysteria, exacerbated by mass suggestion. The ministry wishes to assure the public there is no cause for alarm. Hogwarts remains one of the safest institutions of magical learning in Europe. He watched Fudge scan it, but not read. He already knew what it said. He'd probably written half the quotes himself. Harry tapped the article gently with his fingers.
"They didn't mention Hermione."
Fudge didn't respond. "Or the diary. Or the part where she was possessed, controlled, nearly died." Still nothing. But they did mention ward faults and mass suggestion and schoolyard hysteria. Fudge shifted, straightening the crease in his robes like it had personally offended him. "The public has a right to feel reassured." "No," Harry cut in, quieter now but firmer. "They have a right to feel informed." That landed. Fudge stared at him. The kind, clumsy smile had vanished, replaced by something colder. Well, calculating. "You're young, Potter," he said at last. "You think the world runs on honesty? It doesn't. It runs on stability, and that is built by men like me making decisions you don't understand yet." Harry leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "Maybe, but if you keep rewriting history every time something bad happens, eventually no one's going to believe a word you say." Fudge rose abruptly, brushing imaginary dust from his hat as he collected it. "We're done here." He paused at the door. "You'll remain here until the train leaves for Hogwarts. If you see anything suspicious, anything, you'll report it." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious like mass suggestion and faulty wards?" Fudge didn't answer. "Enjoy the rest of your summer, Harry." he said, turning the handle. And remember, mercy is a privilege. Don't give us a reason to withdraw it. The door shut with a soft but definitive click. Harry sat in the silence that followed, the Prophet still open in front of him, the fire crackling steadily behind. You're young, Potter. His jaw clenched. He wasn't feeling very young anymore. Eventually, he reached for the notebook. It was warm under his palm, as if it had been waiting. He flipped it open to the first blank page, uncapped his quill, and scratched in a message without much thought. I'm in Diagon Alley. Blew up my aunt. Not expelled. Minister's a twat. Hope you're okay. A moment passed. Then the ink shimmered, faded, and words began to reappear beneath his. Surprised? You what? Harry smirked. Long story. She insulted my mum. She floated. Another pause. Concerned. Merlin's beard, Harry, are you all right? Where are you staying? Have you eaten anything? Leaky cauldron. Fire whiskey and dragon steak. You're lying. Fine. Toast and pumpkin juice. Very rebellious. He could almost hear her through the page. I'm glad you're safe. Things have been busy here. Harry paused. Where's here? With Dumbledore. Why? No reply. He stared at the page for another minute, but the parchment remained blank. Whatever Hermione was doing, she wasn't going to say more. See you on the train, her last line finally appeared. Don't get arrested again. Harry closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, blinking at the ceiling. With Dumbledore? He frowned. Something told him this year wasn't going to be quiet either. It started with a thud, then a clatter, then a voice. Fred! For Merlin's sake! Don't drag it! Lift it! I am lifting it! George is dragging... Oi! That's your cauldron, you prat! Mine still has frog guts in it! Harry looked up, just as the leaky cauldron door burst open and the full force of the Weasley family tumbled through it like a red-haired hurricane. Fred and George were wrestling something large and metallic through the doorway. Possibly a cauldron, possibly a cursed kettle, followed closely by Ginny, who ducked expertly beneath a levitating suitcase that seemed to have a mind of its own. Ron came next, sun-browned from Egypt and slightly taller, with the dazed expression of someone who still hadn't caught up with his luggage, much less the jet lag of magical travel. Harry had seen his picture, holding his rat behind giant pyramids in the newspaper, after his family won the lottery. Must have been fun. Then came Mrs. Weasley, herding them like a general in full command of a battalion that had clearly overpacked. Mr. Weasley brought up the rear, distracted mid-step by a self-stirring teacup behind the bar. Harry, dear! Mrs. Weasley swooped in like a force of nature. She wrapped him in a hug that was equal parts affection and compression spell. Look at you, all bones and brooding. You've been eating, haven't you? More or less, Harry said, muffled. Which one? She said suspiciously. More or less? Less, Ron offered helpfully, dropping his suitcase with a thud and collapsing next to Harry. He looks like he's been living off toast and righteous fury. Mrs. Weasley turned. Arthur, do we have any of that high-calorie porridge with the iron enhancement? The boys ate it all, Mr. Weasley said absently, still studying the enchanted register like it might recite poetry. Fred and George gave the trunk a final shove into the corner, where it groaned ominously. Still intact, Fred said, brushing off his hat. More or less. Depends on your definition of intact, George muttered. Then to Harry, any explosions while you were abroad? Cataclysms? Ritual riots? Not yet, Harry replied, but the week's young. Did you hear? Fred said in a stage whisper. There's a mass murderer on the loose. Some bloke named Black, George added, casting a glance toward Mrs. Weasley's back. Not the most original alias, if you ask me. Sounds like a children's book villain. Fred, Molly didn't even look up. Try not to antagonise fate in public. It's not fate we're antagonising, George said. It's tone-deaf security policy. Harry snorted despite himself. Anyway, Ron said, slouching a little lower. Mum's been enchanting everything in sight. My toothbrush now screams if it leaves the suitcase. She's just being cautious, Ginny said, tightening the straps on her duffel. And frankly, after what happened last year, I don't blame her. The tone dipped just slightly, just long enough. Harry gave a small nod. How was Egypt? Hot, Ron replied. Sandy. Bill tried to get us cursed for educational purposes. You should see his hair now, Fred added. Hieroglyphs burned into the ends. Looks like a magical tax return. Fred, Molly snapped. You are not making jokes about ancient spellwork. Too late, George said. Fred already carved a rune into Percy's pillow. Claims it summons punctuality. I am still testing it, Fred added. Could take days. Molly clapped her hands. Enough. Up to the rooms. Ginny, with me. Ron, unpack your things. Fred, George, if I hear one cursed object humming through the floorboards tonight. We'll tell it to keep quiet, Fred said at once. Tell it to hum in G major, George added. Less ominous. Arthur, stop talking to the sugar bowl. I think it blinked at me. I will blink at you, Molly said sharply, ushering them all upstairs. Harry stood there, grinning, exhaustion temporarily forgotten. They were loud, disorganised, brilliant. And for the first time all summer, it felt like the world had colour again. The noise upstairs had dwindled to thumps, laughter, and the occasional bang of Fred and George's luggage attempting to unpack itself. Harry stayed behind by the fire, elbows on the armrests of his chair, watching the embers crackle in the grate. Behind him, soft footsteps. Mr. Weasley's voice followed, quiet, like he didn't want the others to hear. Mind some fresh air, Harry. Harry glanced back. Sure, Edis Treek. They stepped into the narrow back courtyard, where the evening had settled into a cool hush. A few stars blinked overhead, and the bricks of Diagon Alley's rear wall glowed faintly in the lantern light. Arthur reached into his coat and pulled out a battered Muggle lighter, flicking it open more out of habit than need. I'm guessing you've had quite the week, he said gently. Harry gave a humourless snort. You could say that, Arthur offered a faint smile. Cornelius dropped by, did he? Harry raised a brow. How'd you know? He tends to move quietly when he wants to pretend he isn't up to something, Arthur said. Tom told me a ministry visitor came asking for you earlier. Didn't say much else, but I've known Cornelius long enough to spot the pattern. Harry hesitated. He said I wasn't in trouble, that they were dealing with something bigger. Arthur hummed. Did he tell you what that something is? Not exactly, but I know Sirius Black escaped Azkaban. That part's not hard to figure out. Everyone keeps pretending they're not talking about it. Arthur's face sobered. Harry glanced at him sideways. That's what this is about, right? Why they're letting me stay here instead of expelling me. Arthur didn't deny it. He just flicked the lighter again. Flame, click, darkness. They're scared, he said finally. The ministry. And not just because someone broke out of Azkaban. It's who broke out. Sirius Black, Harry said. He was Voldemort's right-hand man, right? Arthur flinched at the name but nodded. That's what the records say. He was one of you-know-who's most loyal supporters. Killed a dozen muggles and a wizard in broad daylight. The street was rubble by the time they found him, laughing. He's the reason Azkaban has never had another escape, until now. Harry folded his arms. They told me not to leave Diagon Alley, not to draw attention, but they never said why. They won't, Arthur said. Fudge wouldn't risk the papers picking up on it. He thinks telling you the truth might send you running straight toward it. Harry blinked. Toward it? Arthur turned, resting both hands on the stone wall of the courtyard. Sirius said, They think Black is after you, Harry. The words hit like a cold draft. Me? Arthur nodded slowly. No one will say it outright, but it fits. Black was obsessed with Voldemort. You defeated Voldemort, and he's not just escaping prison, he's leaving signs. Magical traces in places that make no sense. Things that feel too intentional. Too pointed. Harry stared down at his shoes. "So they let me go," he said after a beat. "Let me stay in the open, not because they trust me, but because they want to use me as bait." Arthur didn't correct him. Instead, he sighed and rubbed his brow. "I don't think Fudge would say it like that. But, yes, he wouldn't waste a political moment. He's more interested in optics than outcomes. And if he thought it'd make him look strong, he'd put a target on your back and call it a shield." Harry swallowed hard. "So what now? I just wait?" "You stay alert," Arthur said. "You keep your head down, and most importantly, you don't try to face this alone. If something happens, you tell someone. Dumbledore, McGonagall, me, Molly." Harry nodded, but his jaw tightened. Arthur looked at him for a long moment. "I know it's hard to trust the people in charge," he said. "They haven't earned it lately. But there are good people, Harry. Not perfect, but good. Find them. Lean on them. That's how we get through dark times. Together." Harry didn't say anything. Arthur clapped a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Come on then, before Molly starts charming the furniture to find us." Harry gave a faint smile and followed him back inside. The breakfast table at the Leaky Cauldron looked like it had just survived a minor explosion. Toast was burnt on one end, buttered by a charmed knife that moved like it was late for something, and half the dishes rattled as if protesting their fate. A rogue pepper shaker had been hexed into sneezing violently every few minutes. Harry sat across from Ron, watching with mild fascination as a piece of bacon tried to escape George's fork. "Swear this thing's alive," George muttered, stabbing again. "Is it tries to file for emancipation? I'm suing." "That's what you get for insulting it," Fred said, sipping tea. "This breakfast has feelings." Ginny sat at the far end, flipping through a thin leather-bound notebook. "This time last week I was in Egypt, climbing pyramids and dodging curses. Now I'm arguing over whose sausage blinked first." "Civilization's a spectrum," said Ron, stabbing a pancake. "You just slid down it." Mrs. Weasley bustled in with a tea tray that nearly collapsed under the weight of marmalade jars and crumpets. "Eat properly, all of you, and stop making the cutlery nervous." Mr. Weasley was seated nearby, nose pressed against the glass of a sugar dispenser like it was an artifact in a museum. "Incredible," he murmured. "Granules perfectly portioned, no wand work required. How does it know when to stop?" "You said that yesterday," Molly replied, dropping jam onto a scone. "And the day before. Yes, and I've yet to be satisfied." Across from Harry, Ron leaned forward, dropping his voice just enough to dodge parental scrutiny. "Mum gave me a few galleons for supplies. Said if I came back with another hand-me-down wand, she'd hex me into a desk lamp." Harry grinned. "Fair. Where to first?" "Flourish and blots." Diagon Alley was alive and caffeinated. Post owls zipped overhead. Storefronts hummed with enchantments. A hat in the window of Madame Malkin's was aggressively advertising itself by changing colours every time someone looked away. As the boys strolled past a shop where self-stirring cauldrons were locked in what looked like a passive-aggressive revolt, Ron glanced sideways. "So, electives," Harry shrugged. "I was thinking magical creatures. You know, Hagrid." Ron nodded approvingly. "Yeah, worst case, we meet something that breathes fire. Best case, it hugs you and steals your wallet." They passed Aelop's Owl Emporium. An enormous tawny owl was glaring at a sign that read, "Do not tap glass," while simultaneously daring someone to tap it. "What about Muggle studies?" Harry offered. "We'd ace it." Ron pulled a face. "You'd ace it. I once asked your cousin if escalators were a form of transportation or performance art. He didn't answer, just stared at me like I'd eaten his dog." "Still sounds easier than divination." "Mate, Ron said. Divination is just lying convincingly about doom. A gust of wind knocked a newspaper loose from a nearby rack. A headline floated by, "Black still at large, Ministry maintains vigilance." Ron kicked it aside like it was bad luck. "Anyway," he went on, "we pick divination and magical creatures. We don't die, we don't study, and we still get to say we're following our passion." "I thought your passion was not failing out of school." "Exactly. Efficiency." Harry chuckled as they pushed open the door to Flourish and Blots. A loud thud greeted them from inside, followed by a shout about someone dropping a box of screaming ink pots. "Education," Ron said deadpan. "Truly magical." The bell above Flourish and Blots gave a final panicked jingle as the boys slipped out, narrowly avoiding a clerk wrestling a stack of self-rearranging almanacs that had just tried to alphabetize themselves by chaos theory. Ron clutched a brown paper bag to his chest like it held his final Horcrux. "That," he said, "was the most expensive armful of paper I have ever carried." Harry held up his own bag, which had already begun muttering the titles of its contents. "At least your history of magic textbook didn't insult your posture." "You bought the revised one?" "It came with a warning label." They turned onto the next street, weaving between window shoppers and a wizard loudly berating his pet ferret for eating a spellbook. The sun had risen higher now, catching on brass shop signs in the glinting trim of Madame Malkin's window display. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions looked exactly as Harry remembered it. A bit too lavender, a bit too lacy, and somehow always smelling faintly of warm parchment and perfume. So stack of freshly pressed Hogwarts robes floated beside Madame Malkin, who eyed Ron's measurements like they personally offended her. "You've grown again," she muttered, tugging at his sleeve. "Arms like a quaffle chaser, posture like a troll." "I'm working on it," Ron mumbled. "You'll slout you right now." "Just a little trollish," Harry offered, grinning. Ron shot him a look. "Why are my friends always comedians?" "'Cause your life is the punchline," said a sentient tape measure, snaking around Ron's neck and making a loud noise. "You hear that?" Ron said. "Even enchanted cloth is bullying me now." Across the shop, Ginny snuck behind a changing screen, holding a navy cloak that shimmered like ink in water. Fred and George were testing how long they could levitate their old robes, before Madame Malkin noticed. It wasn't going well. One sleeve was on fire. Harry ducked behind a row of dress cloaks and turned to Ron. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask. Hermione's notebook messages have been weird." "Weird how?" Ron asked. "Like, she's finally realised we're useless without her?" "She's sent 4 messages. All vague. Can't explain yet, with Dumbledore. Says she's fine, but..." "She says she's fine," Ron echoed flatly, "which means something's absolutely wrong." "You think it's about the diary?" Harry asked quietly. Ron hesitated, the tape freezing mid-air near his neck. "Maybe. Maybe Dumbledore's asking her questions, or making sure there's no, I don't know, after effects." Harry nodded slowly, thumb tracing the notebook's edge. "It's just weird. She sounded different, short, careful." Ron huffed. "If she's off doing secret Dumbledore things, and we're here nearly dying under fitting tape, I'm going to be offended." Ollivander's wand shop hadn't changed since Harry's first visit. Narrow, dusty, and vibrating faintly with the energy of 1,000 tiny tempers bottled in polished wood. Shelves stretched all the way to the ceiling, stuffed with long boxes stacked like mismatched bricks. "Ah," came a soft, rasping voice. "Mr. Weasley." Again. Ollivander emerged from between the shelves like he'd been grown there. His pale eyes glinted as he looked Ron over. 12 inches, ash, unicorn hair. Snapped clean through, I believe, Ron shifted. "Yeah, bit of a spell mishap." "Bit," Harry whispered. "Right, sorry. Old tree with anger issues nearly snapped it in half because I threw a car into it. Then a thick bloke tried to use Obliviate and destroyed it. Wasn't really my fault," Ron said plainly. "It rarely is," Ollivander murmured, stepping forward. "Let's see what fate has in store for you this time." A tape measure zoomed out of nowhere and began measuring Ron's arms, legs, and earlobes as Ollivander muttered to himself and disappeared behind a shelf. Boxes flew in. Wands were tested. One released a stream of earwax. Another burst into applause when Ron pointed it at a quill. One just refused to work unless it was sung to. And then, Ollivander said, returning with a slim, reddish-brown box. He opened it with a soft reverence. Fur. 11 3/4 inches. Dragon heartstring. Unyielding. Ron raised an eyebrow. Unyielding? Stubborn, Harry whispered. Focused, Ollivander corrected, placing the wand gently into Ron's hand. The moment Ron closed his fingers around it, a warmth passed through the air, like a breath inhaled by the whole room. A few boxes rattled. The candle flames lengthened and straightened, like soldiers at attention. Ollivander smiled. Ah, yes. A survivor's wand. Ron blinked. Come again? Fur wands favour those who have faced danger and walked out the other side. Those who don't fall apart when the walls come down. He looked at Ron with eyes that somehow felt older than time. You may not feel it yet, but this wand sees it in you. Ron looked down at the wand, then up at Harry, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. Pride, maybe. Or maybe just the awe of holding something that didn't see him as second best. As they stepped outside into the sun, Ron gave the wand a small swish. A burst of golden light flicked from the tip, dissolving into the breeze. Ron opened his mouth, closed it again. Harry looked at him. You okay? Yeah, Ron said quickly, then added, just never had something that was mine, you know? Not hand-me-down. Harry's chest tightened slightly, but he nodded. It suits you. The scarlet steam engine let out a shriek loud enough to rattle every molar in Harry's skull. Ron gave a dramatic wince and hoisted his trunk onto the train like it owed him money. Brilliant start to the year, he muttered, half deaf and emotionally fragile. Bet we still get homework on the first day. Probably, Harry said, hauling Hedwig's cage up the steps. Maybe we'll be lucky and Lockhart will be back. Ron looked horrified. That's not funny. They weaved through compartments until they found one near the back, mostly empty except for a slumped figure asleep under a patched cloak. Ron paused, squinting. Is that a coat rack with legs or a person? Harry slid the door open. Definitely a person. The figure didn't stir. Well, if he's not dead, we're sitting here, Ron declared, already flopping down and pulling out his wand to further test his skills. Ron pulled out his wand and picked Scabbers up. Right before he could say the incantation, Scabbers leapt from his hand like he'd sensed a death sentence coming. He vanished into Ron's bag just as Ron muttered the spell. Too late. The jet of light struck Harry square in the face. With a ping and a shimmer, Harry's glasses vanished. In their place was a small, shiny bottle with a cork stopper and a swirling bronze liquid inside. The label read, Essence of Regret. Best served cold. Harry held it at arm's length. Did you just transfigure my eyesight into a beverage? Ron paled. I was aiming for the rat. Well, now I'm blind and emotionally enriched. Cheers. Let me fix it. Please don't. The compartment door slid open. Hermione stepped in, wind-tossed and alert, scanning the room like she was bracing for chaos. Her eyes landed on the scene, Ron's wand smoking faintly, Harry squinting at a glass bottle held like a ticking bomb. She didn't say anything right away. She just sighed, crossed the compartment, and sat down quietly next to Harry. Hold still, she murmured. She raised her wand and tapped the bottle gently. Restituo spectacular. The bottle shimmered, dissolved, and reformed into Harry's glasses in her free hand. Then, with a soft, familiar ease, Hermione leaned in and slipped them back onto his face. The lenses settled over his eyes, and the world snapped back into place. Hermione's face just inches from his, steady and exasperated in the most comforting way. Better? She asked. Harry blinked. Much. I can see your disappointment clearly now. Hermione stood up, smiling at the two boys. I've missed you guys. They all laughed and settled in for the long, familiar ride through a beautiful, foggy night.
Ron was still rummaging through his trunk, muttering about Scabbers' emotional cowardice, when Hermione casually unrolled a folded piece of parchment from her bag and laid it flat across her lap.
"What's that?" Ron asked, suspicious of anything with columns.
"My timetable," she said brightly. "I had it finalised by Al 2 weeks ago."
Harry glanced over. The schedule looked like it had been hexed by an overachiever. It was colour-coded, spell-annotated, and somehow layered like a flip book. Ron leaned forward.
"Wait, arithmancy, ancient runes, care of magical creatures, divination, muggle studies, and study of ancient magics?"
Hermione looked up innocently. "Yes?" Ron blinked.
"You do realise there are only so many hours in a day?" "I've worked it out." "With what?"
Hermione didn't respond, just smiled in that way she did when she knew something they didn't. Harry gave a low whistle. "I thought we were being ambitious just picking 2.
3, technically," Ron said. "We're stuck with divination because Trelawney cornered Mum at the owl stand and told her I had rare inner sight. I told her I just squint a lot."
Harry laughed. "We both took care of magical creatures too. Figured Hagrid's class couldn't be that dangerous." Ron raised a skeptical brow. "You have met Hagrid, yeah?" Hermione ignored them and neatly rolled her timetable back up.
"Honestly, you two, you're acting like it's impossible to be curious and organised."
"I'd settle for conscious by lunch," Ron muttered. The train began to slow. The sky outside had darkened strangely fast, clouds heavy, wind picking up. The compartment lights flickered once. "Are we stocking?" Harry asked, frowning. "Doesn't look like a station," Hermione said, peering out. "Too early, isn't it?" The train gave a low groan as it came to a halt. Moments later, the lamps dimmed completely. Something cold pressed into the air, not just the temperature, but something deeper. The warmth in Harry's chest shrank inward like a snuffed flame. He felt it before he saw it. The fog on the windows, the silence crawling in, the breath of something not quite alive. A shadow moved past their compartment door. Ron leaned forward, his voice tight. "What was that?" The door slid open. The thing that entered wore tattered black robes and glided instead of walked. Its face, if it had one, was obscured by the hood. All they saw was a hand, skeletal and grey, reaching forward. Then Harry's world tilted.
His lungs tightened like he was drowning. The cold clawed into his bones. A scream, high, sharp and desperate, filled his ears. And it took a split second too long to realise it wasn't anyone in the compartment. It was in his head. "Harry!" Hermione's voice, distant, muffled. Then, "Expecto Patronum!" A flash of silver erupted, forcing the thing back like smoke pushed by wind. Harry slumped sideways into Ron. The light from the spell faded. The cold began to lift. The thing, the Dementor, was gone. In its place stood the figure from earlier, the sleeping man in the corner. Now fully awake, wand still raised. Professor Lupin. He stepped forward and crouched beside them. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, voice low and calm. Ron looked pale. Hermione was clutching the edge of her seat, knuckles white. Harry didn't answer. He was still shaking. Lupin reached into his coat and handed him a bar of chocolate, neatly wrapped in parchment. "Eat this," he said gently. "All of you. It helps." Harry took it with trembling fingers. Lupin looked him over with concern that didn't feel performative. "You felt it worst," he said softly. "I'm sorry." Harry nodded once, then took a bite. Warmth bloomed behind his ribs again, fragile but real.
the train began to move, and for the first time that night, none of them had anything clever to say. Ron was poking at his chocolate like it had personally offended him. Hermione had pulled out a small notebook, less for writing, Harry suspected, and more to steady her hands. Lupin remained standing, leaning casually against the doorframe. His wand had vanished back into his cloak, but his presence still felt like a shield. Quiet, solid, dependable. "I've never felt anything like that," Harry finally said. His voice was low, scratchy, like the cold had gotten to his throat. Like all the good was just gone. And that scream. Who was that? "That's what they do," Lupin said softly. "Dementors. They feed on hope, happiness, your best memories, leave you with the worst." Ron frowned. Why would anyone keep something like that around? "They're used as guards at Azkaban," Lupin explained. "Effective ones, but make no mistake, they're not tame. They don't care who you are or what you've done." He looked at Harry more directly now. "They were searching the train because someone escaped. A very dangerous prisoner." Harry didn't speak, but Hermione's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she already suspected more than she was letting on. "Rest," Lupin said gently. "There's not much time before we arrive. And try to eat all the chocolate. It's not a joke. It really does help."
As he slid the compartment door shut behind him, Harry looked down at the remaining chocolate in his hand.
"This is so unfair," Ron muttered. "Third year and now we're dealing with soul-sucking misery ghosts." "We're always dealing with something," Hermione said quietly. Her hand was shaking, trying to hold her quill. Harry just stared out the window, the cold still lingering faintly in his chest, and the scream still ringing in his ears. By the time the train groaned to a final stop at Hogsmeade Station, rain was streaking down the windows, and the sky had sunk into a dull slate grey. "Brilliant," Ron said, yanking his cloak tighter. "Wet robes and emotional trauma, truly spoiling us this year." They joined the queue of students shuffling down the narrow corridor past murmurs of, "Did you see that thing?" and "Why did the lights go out?" Outside, the rain hit like needles. Hagrid's voice boomed over the storm. First years over here." Harry turned and gave him a quick wave. Hagrid's lantern paused mid-air. "Harry," he called, beaming through the rain. "Glad to see ya. Rough trip, eh?" "Understatement of the year," Ron muttered as they ducked into one of the carriages that moved without horses. Harry still hadn't figured that one out. As they pulled away toward the castle, Hermione leaned forward, water dripping from her curls. The lantern lit her face sporadically as the carriage went over the bumpy road. "Did either of you hear something?" she asked carefully. "When the Dementor came in?" Ron shook his head. "Felt like I fell into an ice bath, but no voices." Harry said nothing, because he had heard something. A woman's scream, pleading, dying. He shivered and looked out the window as the outline of Hogwarts rose through the mist, its towers jagged and solemn against the stormy sky. Something about it felt different this year. Older, heavier, like the castle knew what was coming. The great hall, usually humming with chatter and clinking silverware, was unusually hushed. No one was really eating. Some poked half-heartedly at roast chicken or sipped pumpkin juice, but the mood hadn't lifted. The Dementors had drained more than just warmth from the train. Even the enchanted ceiling seemed to sense it. Rain misted down in slow sheets, muted thunder rolling somewhere far above the candles. At the Gryffindor table, Neville sat hunched beside Harry, his face pale and still damp. His hands trembled as he tried to pour himself water, spilling a little on the table. "Here," Hermione said softly, steadying the pitcher for him. "You all right?" Neville nodded too quickly. Yeah, just cold soul." He wasn't. Across the room, even Draco Malfoy had gone unusually quiet. He wasn't holding court the way he usually did, just chewing slowly, eyes darting toward the staff table like he was watching for another surprise. Ron leaned toward Harry and whispered, Either Malfoy's plotting something, or he actually got spooked. Harry didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the high table where Dumbledore had risen to his feet. The headmaster's expression was unreadable, his half-moon spectacles gleaming in the candlelight. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried to every corner of the hall with ease. "Welcome," he said, "to another year at Hogwarts." A low ripple of polite applause passed over the students, then faded. "I trust your journey here was eventful," Dumbledore continued, his tone never losing its warmth, though a subtle gravity undercut each word. "What you encountered on the train today, those creatures at the doors, were Dementors. They are prison guards of Azkaban, placed here by the Ministry for the school's protection." He paused, and the word protection seemed to hang in the air like mist that wouldn't settle. "I did not approve their presence," he added, more firmly now, "but I was overruled." Silence met him again, deeper this time. "I must warn you, Dementors do not understand mercy. They do not distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. To them, suffering is not an unfortunate side effect. It is their method." Some students visibly shifted in their seats. Several glanced toward the large oak doors, as if checking to see they remained shut. Dumbledore's voice softened again. "It is natural to feel shaken, but let me remind you of something just as true. Fear is not weakness. Darkness will find us, with or without our permission. What matters, what has always mattered, is what we do with the light we still carry." His eyes swept across the sea of faces. First years and seventh years, purebloods and muggle-borns, brave ones and nervous ones, all staring back. "We are not here simply to teach charms and potions and hexes. We are here to remind you, in every class and corridor and common room, that hope is a discipline, and courage is sometimes as simple as holding your ground against the cold." He gave the smallest of smiles, just enough to warm the words as they landed. "You are not alone," Dumbledore said. "Not tonight, not in the days ahead. Hogwarts remains your home, and your home will stand." Then, as if the weight of the hall could not bear more than one heartbeat of silence longer, he nodded. "Please welcome our new defense against the dark arts professor, Remus Lupin." Polite applause followed, with a few enthusiastic claps from Gryffindor. Lupin gave a small wave, looking sheepish beneath his patchy cloak. "Prefects," Dumbledore said with a final gesture, "you know what to do. Good night all, and remember, light does not vanish, even when it flickers." With that, he sat down, and though the hall began to stir again, Harry couldn't help but think that those final words weren't meant to reassure the students. They were meant to remind them. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting lazy orange shadows across the worn armchairs and thick rugs. Rain tapped gently on the windows now. Most of the common room had emptied, first years ushered to bed by their prefects, older students slipping off in twos and threes. The silence was deep but not uncomfortable. Harry sat in one of the armchairs nearest the fire, legs drawn up, his gaze unfocused on the flames. Across from him, Ron had half slumped into his own seat, fiddling absently with his new wand. Fear, 11 3/4 inches, dragon heartstring, and occasionally casting sparks upward like a boy with a lighter in too much time. "I think Dumbledore was talking about the Dementors," Ron murmured after a while, his voice low. "That bit about not letting them put the light out. Or maybe he meant Sirius Black." "Maybe both," Hermione said quietly, settling down between them on a poof. Her hair was still frizzy from the rain. She had her knees tucked to her chest, sleeves pulled over her hands. "Do you think they'll stay at the school all year?" Ron asked. "The Dementors?" "I hope not," Hermione replied quickly, then hesitated. I don't like them. Ron raised an eyebrow. You? Scared of something? Blimey, mark the date. Hermione didn't laugh. They make it feel like you'll never be happy again. Harry said nothing. The fire cracked, spitting embers. He hadn't told them what he heard. The screaming, his mother's voice sharp and panicked, rising through the static in his skull. He shifted slightly, arms hugging tighter around his knees. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words sat at the back of his throat like stones. Instead, he watched Hermione. There was something quiet behind her eyes, and she clearly didn't want to explain it. Whatever arrangement she had with Dumbledore, it wasn't meant for right now. Outside, thunder grumbled somewhere in the Highlands.
The quiet held for a stretch, until the portrait hole creaked open and in tumbled Fred and George Weasley like twin hurricanes in matching scarves. "Evening, fellow morale casualties," Fred declared, striking a dramatic pose. "We've assessed the mood and determined it's terminal. Symptoms include sighing, sulking, and staring meaningfully into fireplaces." George added, pulling a shimmering orb from his pocket. "Time to prescribe a proper distraction." He held it aloft. "Behold, the chuckle ball, guaranteed to restore serotonin or your knuts back. Magic 8-ball meets emotional support chicken," Fred said proudly, "except spherical and legally distinct." George gave it a shake and let it bounce. The orb hit the carpet, pulsed once, and blurted, "Statistically, someone in this room peaked in year 1. We just don't know who." A few third years sputtered with laughter. The ball bounced again. "Today's self-care tip: drop your homework and blame Peeves." Hermione looked up from her reading with visible restraint. "That's not how academic responsibility works." "Chuckleball disagrees," Fred said. "It's very pro-chaos." George leaned into Harry. "Want to try? It's like truth serum with worse impulse control." Harry grinned, took the orb and gave it a toss. He's brave, kind, and deeply traumatized. So naturally, we gave him a broom and said good luck. Ron choked on his pumpkin juice. "That's disturbingly accurate." "You will not fail Transfiguration this year. You might even be average." Ron turned red. "Oi!" "See?" George beamed. "Instant self-esteem boost, or public shame, it's a fine line." Hermione Granger. "Statistically, 84% more responsible than the Ministry of Magic." Hermione's head snapped up. "Who programmed that?" "I didn't," George said. "But the ball respects truth." Neville timidly poked it with a finger. The orb pulsed. Neville Longbottom, still the only person in this room who watered the common room plant. It noticed. It's grateful. Everyone turned. The fern in the corner waved a single leaf. "Your only fan," George whispered to Neville. The orb rolled to Ginny and flashed. "Ginny Weasley. Weaponized sarcasm level 7. Avoid direct eye contact." "Level 8, Ginny corrected, deadpan. Harry tossed the ball again and it hovered, thoughtful. Then, homework, Harry's third most feared enemy after Voldemort, and coordinated outfits. "Hey," Harry said, mock defensive, "scarves are hard." The orb then rolled near the fireplace, flickering orange. Its voice dropped. "Reminder, even when things are dark, jokes are a form of rebellion." The common room quieted a little. Then it chirped again. "Also, do not let Ron test his new wand on you." The trapdoor creaked as Ron pushed it open, releasing a swirl of perfumed steam that smelled vaguely of cinnamon, old tea leaves, and something inexplicably damp, like if a fortune cookie had been buried in a compost heap. Harry climbed into the circular room behind him, blinking. It was dim and hazy, like someone had tried to host a séance inside a closet full of shawls. Beaded curtains dripped from the walls, and every surface was covered in deep velvets and tasselled tablecloths. Somewhere near the ceiling,
A teacup was rotating. "Well," Ron said, "either we're in divination or someone hired a ghost to decorate." Hermione emerged behind them, eyes alert. "It's supposed to stimulate inner sensitivity. The lighting, the incense, the ambient charm loops. It's like being smothered by a grandmother," Ron muttered, one with no sense of personal space. Then a voice floated through the mist like silk through fog. "Welcome, dear children." Professor Trelawney stepped into view, tall and ethereal, her robes layered like drapes, and her eyes magnified to goldfish proportions behind enormous spectacles. She clasped her long fingers before her. "I am Professor Sybil Trelawney," she said, as though unveiling a rare relic, "and you are standing at the threshold of the mystic arts." Harry glanced at Ron. Ron mouthed, "Help?" "Few possess the inner eye," Trelawney went on, "and fewer still can bear the burden of truth." She turned her gaze directly on Harry, who sat straighter without meaning to. "And yet, I sense it. A shadow clings to your aura, Mr. Potter. A most curious shape." Hermione shifted in her seat, her expression tight. Trelawney glided to the front and gestured dramatically. "We shall begin with the crystal ball, the most elusive of our tools. Gaze deep and describe what comes. Speak freely, the future listens." They sat. Harry stared at the orb before him, which looked exactly like what it was, a fancy snow globe without the snow. "Clear your mind," Trelawney urged. "Let your soul drift. See without seeing." Ron leaned closer to his and muttered, "I see the future, and it's hungry." Hermione elbowed him sharply. Trelawney drifted toward Harry. You are closer to the veil. Tell me, what do you see?" Harry hesitated. He didn't want to say it, but something had taken shape in the mist. Just the faintest outline, but unmistakable. "It's a dog," he said finally. Trelawney inhaled sharply. "Describe it." "It's huge," Harry murmured. "Black, like it's made of shadow, standing in a field, just staring."
A chill ran across the room. Even the harp stopped plucking. Trelawney's voice dropped to a near whisper. "The Grim." Ron glanced at Harry, suddenly less amused. Trelawney nodded solemnly. "The omen of death, a harbinger stalking those fated to die young." Silence. Ron opened his mouth, then closed it again. Harry stared at the ball. He didn't know what disturbed him more, the shape in the crystal, or how certain he was it was still there, even with his eyes closed. They descended the ladder in silence, the heavy velvet scent still clinging to their clothes like a bad omen. "I don't care what she says," Ron muttered once they hit the corridor. "You are not dying, mate, not unless you trip over that shawl she was wearing and suffocate." Harry didn't laugh. He kept picturing the dog, the way it had just stood there. Hermione slowed her pace to match his. "She's wrong, Harry," she said firmly. "Divination is barely a science. It's all symbolism and projection and dramatic flair. If I squinted hard enough into that crystal ball, I'd probably see a unicorn doing taxes." Harry gave her a sideways look. "Okay, maybe not that," she added, cracking a smile, "but you get the point. The Grim is just a superstition. Dogs are everywhere." "Yeah," Ron said quickly, "and that one didn't even look that scary. I saw it too for a second. It was just kind of looming, in a friendly way." Hermione gave him a look. "You didn't see anything, Ron." "Exactly, see? Subjective mess," he said with a grin. "Should have taken Muggle studies." The path to Hagrid's hut was alive with the crunch of gravel and the low hum of conversation. A warm late summer breeze tugged at their robes as the trio made their way down the sloping lawn. "Still can't believe you managed that vanishing spell," Hermione said, nudging Ron. "Transfiguring an entire pincushion into vapour? That's Newt-level magic." Ron beamed, modestly brushing a bit of dirt off his sleeve. "I mean, I am a bit of a prodigy,"
Can't rule that out. More like your wand isn't trying to commit manslaughter anymore, Harry said dryly. Exactly. That old thing was cursed. This one listens to me. We're in sync now. A bond forged by destiny, I tell you, Ron said proudly. Hermione rolled her eyes but smiled. Well, whatever the reason, it's good to see you actually enjoying class. Maybe I can stop doing your homework now? Ron grinned. Let's not rule that out too quickly.
As they rounded the bend, Hagrid's unmistakable frame came into view. Standing just outside his hut, hair as wild as ever and beaming like a man about to share his most prized secret.
All right, everyone, he called as students filtered in. Today, we're going a bit off course. Literally. There was a collective pause. We're heading into the forest. A few students exchanged glances. Malfoy made an annoyed groan. Don't worry, Hagrid added quickly. We're not going far. Just a clearing nearby. Lovely light for introductions. To what? Asked Seamus. You'll see, Hagrid said, clearly delighted. Now, books out. A dozen students fumbled with the Monster Book of Monsters. Instantly, chaos bloomed. Neville shrieked as his copy bit down on his sleeve and refused to let go. Parvati's book skittered across the grass like a furious crab. Ron had his pressed between his knees, trying to loop the belt around its snapping spine. Why didn't we do this before class? He muttered, narrowly dodging a paper-cut slash. Harry's book was snarling softly under his arm like an insulted wolfhound. Hermione, naturally, had hers already shut and humming with obedient stillness. She told everyone to stroke the spine, obviously. Hagrid clapped his hands. That's the spirit, real hands-on learning. Let's move. They trudged into the forest behind him, books squirming in bags, shoes crunching on moss and sticks. The trees loomed overhead, thick and familiar. Despite the daylight, the air felt cooler here, filtered through ancient boughs. When they reached the clearing, Hagrid turned, eyes twinkling. Right then, he said. Time to meet the real star of the day. He gave a sharp whistle. The sound echoed once, twice, and then the underbrush rustled. Out stepped a creature unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Vast wings folded against a steel-grey body, sharp eyes scanning the group with regal suspicion. Its front half resembled a massive eagle, proud and alert. Its back legs were those of a powerful horse, planted firmly in the earth. Oh, wow, Harry whispered. Bloody hell, Ron breathed. Say hello to Buckbeak, Hagrid beamed, but don't just go running up to him. Hippogriffs are proud. Gotta bow first. Show respect. If he bows back, then you can approach. Buckbeak ruffled his feathers as if the very notion of disrespect was personally offensive. Go on, Harry, Hagrid said. Give it a try. Harry blinked. Me? You've got a good calm energy, Hagrid said. He'll like that. Harry stepped forward slowly, heart knocking against his ribs, and accidentally snapped a twig that made Buckbeak jump forward. Harry felt himself move back slightly, and he turned and saw Hermione pulling his robes to step back. Harry put a reassuring hand up to her and moved forward. He gave a deep, respectful bow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Buckbeak bowed back. The class let out a collective breath. Hagrid clapped like someone had just won the lottery. Go on now, he said. Give him a stroke. Harry reached out gently, hand hovering over the smooth feathers near Buckbeak's beak. The creature blinked at him, then gave a sharp, approving nod. Hagrid called, Hop on then. What? Harry said, blinking. He trusts ya. Go on, climb up, just behind the wings. But Harry swung one leg over carefully, gripping a tuft of feathers for balance. Buckbeak shifted slightly beneath him, powerful muscles rippling. Hold tight, Hagrid called, barely concealing his glee. There was a beat of silence, and then Buckbeak launched into the air. The forest floor dropped away like the world had tilted. Harry's stomach followed. Wind tore through his hair, and his grip tightened as they soared over the treetops. Buckbeak's wings beat with graceful force, catching thermals and gliding in wide arcs. Harry had his eyes shut tight during liftoff. But once Buckbeak smoothly glided above the castle, Harry was amazed. They drifted from the castle to the lake, where Buckbeak lowered itself just above the water. Harry stared at their reflection over the black, glossy lake, which made him cheer wildly. Even his scar faded into background static. There was only air, sky, and speed. And for the first time in weeks, Harry felt weightless in the best possible way.
Buckbeak arced once, then dove gently, and landed with a crunch of forest leaves. Harry slid off, legs wobbly, heart hammering with adrenaline.
That, he said breathlessly, was bloody amazing.
Easy there, Hermione snapped out of habit. Malfoy stepped forward, arms crossed, mouth curled in disdain. Typical. Teacher's pet gets the first ride.
Oh, I'd love a turn, Malfoy said silkily. Surely if Potter can do it.
Draco, maybe just wait, Crabbe offered, uncharacteristically cautious. But Malfoy was already bowing. Badly. Buckbeak did not bow back. Hagrid opened his mouth to call him off, but Malfoy, clearly impatient, stepped forward with a sneer.
Come on, it's a glorified chicken.
The movement was fast, barely visible. Buckbeak lunged before Hagrid could step in front. Malfoy let out a scream and hit the ground, clutching his arm. Blood seeped through his robes. The class erupted into chaos. Students backed away, shouting. Hagrid dashed forward and knelt beside Malfoy, who wailed like he'd been run over by a centaur.
Didn't wait for the bow,
Hagrid muttered, eyes full of panic.
Didn't listen. Oh, Merlin.
Is he okay? Harry asked, stomach turning.
I'll take him to the hospital wing,
Hagrid said, lifting Malfoy like he was made of paper.
Last dismissed. Go straight back. No detours.
Malfoy's voice carried into the trees as they vanished down the path.
My arm is ripped off. This is a lawsuit, you oath.
The clearing was quiet again. Harry was still watching the spot where Buckbeak had stood, wondering how something so majestic could turn dangerous in a blink.
The next day, the dungeons were as cheerful as ever. Dripping stone, pale torchlight, and the faint smell of pickled despair. Harry yawned into his sleeve as he and Ron shuffled to their usual seats near the back. The clatter of cauldrons and the low rumble of students made for a sleepy kind of chaos, broken only when the classroom door slammed shut hard enough to make the walls flinch. Snape swept in like a thundercloud in human form. No talking! There hadn't been any. He paused dramatically at the front, robes still settling. This term, we will be expanding beyond textbook exercises and juvenile mishandling of boiling liquids. He stalked toward the blackboard and flicked his wand. Chalk scratched across it in eerie silence before the letters formed. Term project. Brewing the Wolfsbane potion. A few learners rose from the room. Harry blinked at the words, unsure he'd read them right. Each pair, Snape continued, will be expected to research, prepare, and, if you can manage not to set yourselves on fire, correctly brew a stabilized version of the Wolfsbane potion by the end of term. A theoretical understanding is insufficient. I want results. Failure will be graded accordingly. Ron leaned over and whispered, Isn't Wolfsbane, insanely difficult? Harry nodded. And, for werewolves, which we definitely know how to handle, Ron muttered. This'll go brilliantly. Snape's eyes snapped to them instantly. Potter Weasley, since your enthusiasm for chatting seems boundless, you may start us off. Ron straightened up, eyes wide. What? Choose your partners, Snape said coolly. Quickly! Ron turned to Harry, only to find Hermione sliding into the seat beside Harry with the speed and precision of a chess master executing a winning move. Harry, she said briskly, already unpacking parchment. Harry blinked. Where did you... I've been here since roll call, she whispered. You just weren't paying attention. Ron's mouth opened, then closed again. He turned around slowly, locking eyes with Neville, who looked equally cornered. Well, hello, Neville, Ron said with mock brightness. Neville smiled nervously. We're doomed. Snape, apparently satisfied by this small act of psychological warfare, continued. Partner selections are final. You will share notes, workloads, and his lips curled faintly, consequences. He waved his wand and instructions appeared on the board in swift, stabbing lines. Begin research on magical interactions between core ingredients. Have knowledge of absorption enhancers by next week. You'll need taste-masking charms as well. If you don't have access to professional-level potion texts, figure it out. As students scrambled for books, Harry leaned toward Hermione. Are you seriously taking this class and all your electives? Yes, she said without looking up. Harry blinked. But how? Efficient study habits. Now pass the Wolfsbane route. Ron leaned across the table, eyeing her warily. But that's completely impossible. Some of those electives go around the same time, which means you'd have to clone yourself to attend them. Hermione gave him a pointed look. I'm managing fine, thank you very much. I'd be more worried about yourself. Try not to confuse the cauldron with your inkwell this time, Hermione said sweetly. Ron opened his mouth in protest, but was immediately cut off by Neville asking if he should be measuring the ink or the ingredient. Harry bit back a grin. Snape might have given them their most impossible project yet, and possibly the two worst potions students were at the same cauldron. Hermione quickly began measuring the route and gave Harry instructions for researching ingredients. Something told Harry he would actually enjoy potions class this year. The next class was Defense Against the Dark Arts. The classroom was dimly lit, the windows high and dusty, and the ceiling hung with thick cobwebs. Yet, the air felt oddly calm, almost expectant. Professor Lupin stood at the front with his usual mild, slightly ragged look, hands clasped loosely before him. Today, he said, we're going to learn how to fight something many wizards fear, not because it's powerful, but because it knows how to get inside your head. The class went still. A boggart, Lupin continued, gesturing toward a tall, rattling cabinet in the corner. Lurks in dark spaces, closets, cupboards, wardrobes, and it takes the shape of whatever scares you most. The key to defeating a boggart is laughter. Or, more specifically, ridiculousness. So for my lesson today, you will all face what fears you, but do not be discouraged, for I want you all to look whatever appears in the eye and turn it into something amusing. The spell we will use is ridiculous. He gave them a half smile. Let's begin. Neville, would you join me? Neville blanched. Me? You live with your grandmother, yes? Yes, sir. Well, I imagine your wardrobe's seen its fair share of boggarts. The class chuckled, and Neville trudged forward like he was on his way to the gallows. Lupin bent down and whispered something to him. Neville's eyes widened, but he nodded. The cabinet shook again as if it had heard them. Wand at the ready, Lupin said. Neville raised his wand. The cabinet creaked open, and out stepped Professor Snape, cloaked in menace, sneering as he held up a roll of parchment. Even though they knew it was a boggart, a few students recoiled. This Snape was somehow extra Snapes, sneering harder, gliding more ominously, holding up a scroll. Longbottom, the fake Snape hissed. Your Wolfsbane submission is a disgrace to Ick. F. Ridiculous, Neville shouted. Snape's robes morphed into a neon green dress. A stuffed buzzard flopped onto his head. His shoes turned into squeaky pink bunny slippers. Dean snorted so hard he nearly choked. Everyone burst into hard laughter. Even Draco and his goons snickered. Well done, Lupin grinned. Excellent start, Neville. A natural talent. Who's next? Neville received some high fives as he grinned to the end of the line. Ron stepped up, spinning his new wand for everyone to see. Let's do this. The boggart twisted and snapped into a massive spider, its hairy legs twitching, eyes glinting like marbles. Ron let out a sound between a yelp and a battle cry. Ridiculous! The spider slipped into roller skates and crashed into a desk leg with an angry squeak. Lavender screamed. Seamus cheered.
Then it was Seamus's turn.
The boggart became a wand, scolding in a high-pitched voice.
Incorrect emphasis again, you potato-brained layabout.
Ridiculous! Seamus cried, and the wand transformed into a licorice whip that slacked itself in the face. Laughter echoed through the classroom. Then Lupin looked to the back. Miss Granger? Hermione hesitated, then nodded. She stepped forward briskly, taking a place before the cabinet. Don't overthink it, Lupin offered kindly. The wardrobe creaked. The air dropped. Out stepped a boy. 16? Maybe. Slim. Handsome. Pale and still as marble. It was Tom Riddle. His school robes were pristine. His Slytherin badge gleamed. His eyes, dark and piercing, landed on Hermione with quiet amusement. Hermione froze. Gasps rippled through the class. Even Draco sat forward, frowning in confusion. Harry's hand moved instinctively to his wand. Hermione's grip faltered. Her lips parted, but no words came. Behind me, Harry muttered and stepped in front of her. The boggart twisted, morphing into a black-cloaked Dementor in a burst of mist. The room chilled instantly. Ice needled Harry's spine, the lights flickered, frost crackled across the floorboards. Several students yelped. Draco went pale. Even Crabbe let out a noise like a kicked goat. Harry's knees buckled. A scream swelled in his ears. His mother's voice. Maybe. And then, ridiculous! The Dementor turned into a ballooning full moon, bright and silver, squealing as it deflated and zipped around the classroom like a punctured blimp before thudding against the wall. Laughter returned, weak but grateful. Lupin stepped forward, steady and composed. That's enough for today, he said gently. Well done, everyone. You handled yourselves admirably. The class began to disperse, chattering quietly. Hermione sank into her chair, pale and wide-eyed. Harry sat beside her. You okay? I didn't know it'd be him, she said softly. I thought I was past that. Harry didn't press. He simply nodded. Ron nudged Harry's shoulder, whispering, Mate, you see how I destroyed that spider? It was nothing. Not now, Ron, Harry muttered. Lupin approached them, his voice low. Harry, Hermione, well done, truly. I'd like a word with you later if that's all right. They both nodded. As Lupin walked away, Ron whispered, I think he's brilliant. Harry wasn't sure what to say. He just stared at the cabinet, still shivering faintly, and tried not to think about what he heard before the laughter. Later that day, Lupin stood beside the hearth in his office. Harry and Hermione entered quietly, both still a bit rattled from earlier. He gestured to the 2 worn armchairs before his desk. Come in, come in! Shut the door behind you, would you? Harry did so, and Hermione perched cautiously on the edge of the nearest chair. Harry followed suit. I appreciate you both coming, Lupin said. He conjured a tray of biscuits with a casual flick of his wand. I won't keep you long. He sat across from them, studying them for a moment, not with suspicion but with a softness that reminded Harry of Mrs. Weasley when she was especially worried. You both showed great courage today, Lupin said, not just because you faced something frightening, but because you didn't let it control you. Hermione looked down at her lap. Her hands were clenched. You saw who I saw, she said quietly. Lupin nodded. Professor Dumbledore trusted me with a few relevant truths before the year began, just enough to help me be prepared should anything surface. I hope that's all right. Harry watched her, the tension in her shoulders so different from the Hermione who rattled off essays like spells. I thought I was past it. I thought, if I ignored it, maybe he'd stay gone. She blinked hard. But he's still in my head. Lupin's voice was quiet. That's not failure, Hermione. That's memory. Memory takes its own time. You were used, manipulated, violated. In a way most adults wouldn't understand. That doesn't vanish in a summer. She didn't answer, but her posture softened slightly. I don't want it to control me, she said. Then it won't, Lupin said simply. You've already taken the hardest step. You faced it. Hermione nodded slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you, Professor. Then Lupin turned to Harry. And you, he said. handled something even full-grown wizards often can't. Dementors are not ordinary fear, they're despair. They feed on the worst thing you've ever felt and leave nothing else behind. Harry shifted in his seat. It wasn't even a real one. No, Lupin said, but your reaction was. He leaned forward slightly. I don't mean to press, but I want to offer this. If you'd like to learn how to protect yourself, really protect yourself from them, I'm willing to teach you. Something beyond what we'll cover in class. Harry looked up, surprised. Really? Lupin smiled. You already have something most don't, the will to protect others. You stepped in front of Hermione without hesitating. That's the instinct of a true defender. Harry felt a warmth creep up the back of his neck. Yeah, well, I didn't really think. He scared her. She didn't deserve to see that face again, Lupin said gently. And neither did you. Lupin turned to Hermione. The same offer applies to you, not just spells. Support. If ever you need to talk, you can come to me, no questions.
Charms was interesting that week because in the middle of the lesson, the door creaked open and a second year poked her head in, breathless. Professor, she said, sorry, but Professor McGonagall says to remind everyone not to linger after class. There's been a sighting near the glen. Flitwick blinked. A sighting? The girl nodded. Sirius Black. Just rumours, but McGonagall says to go straight to the next lesson or back to common rooms. A murmur rolled through the room like a slow wave. Even the water stopped dripping for a second. Thank you, Miss Vance, Flitwick said with a nod, then turned back to the class, clapping once. Right then, no more guises, please. Let's clean up. As they left, Ron muttered, Think it's real? Could have been a bear or something. Or a rumour someone started to skip herbology, Seamus added with a grin. Harry didn't answer. He adjusted his bag, eyes flicking toward the cloudy windows. Just a rumour, he told himself. But his fingers had curled tightly around his wand without him noticing. Later, the class had gathered at the top of the astronomy tower, bundled in cloaks and scarves, their breaths fogging the crisp September air. The sky above was an ink-wash of stars, spread wide and glittering, and Professor Sinistra paced slowly between the telescopes, her boots clinking softly on the stone floor. Tonight, she said, we study Canis Major, the Greater Dog constellation. Harry adjusted his telescope, fighting the chill in his fingers. A low breeze whispered across the tower, lifting hair and parchment. Find Sirius, Sinistra instructed, the brightest star in the northern hemisphere. It's located in the chest of the constellation, not to be confused with its namesake, no matter what the papers say. A few students chuckled under their breath. Ron gave Harry a look. Harry didn't return it. He was focused. He narrowed his eyes to the eyepiece and searched the stars. There it was, Sirius, cold and steady. Just below it, fainter, a shape formed, two more stars arcing into what could be legs, another into a pointed tail. It looked unmistakably like a dog. A black dog. His breath caught. Ron, he muttered, shifting his telescope. Tell me you see that. Ron leaned in, squinted, then tilted his head. Huh. Creepy. Looks like a mangled duck. No, it looks like the Grim. The Grim? I don't know about that one, Harry. Harry didn't answer. He sat back from the telescope, blinking at the sky as if the stars might rearrange themselves under scrutiny. Just a constellation, Hermione said from his other side, barely glancing up from her star chart. Astronomy is full of pareidolia, seeing patterns that aren't actually meaningful. We learned that first year, remember? I know what I saw, Harry muttered. Hermione didn't push. She just adjusted her chart and said in her usual brisk way, If you find it so interesting, cot the angles. If it's really a Grim, it'll match the omens. The stars continued to burn above them, silent and distant. But Harry couldn't shake the image. A black dog, watching from the sky. The first full week of classes came and went like a blown-out candle, quick, flickering, and somehow still stressful.
By Saturday morning, the castle had settled into a rhythm. Portraits gossiping softly as students passed, staircases behaving with only minor vindictiveness, and the smell of pumpkin scones wafting through the great hall as owls swooped in with the Daily Post. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table, absently poking at his eggs. Around him, students were buzzing, not about homework for once, but about Hogsmeade. "First weekend set for Halloween," Ron said through a mouthful of toast. "Zonkos, honeydukes, maybe even a butterbeer at 3 broomsticks if we're lucky. Assuming you've remembered to hand this in." Hermione slid a crisp, folded parchment across the table toward him, her own permission slip signed in tight, formal script by both her parents. Ron groaned. "Mum gave me mine, then packed it so deep I had to reverse engineer the suitcase charms just to find it." Harry tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. From across the room, Professor McGonagall's voice rose just above the morning murmur. "Third years, please have your permission forms ready. I'll be collecting them now. No form, no visit. That includes everyone." A rustle of papers followed as students fished around their bags. Dean was digging like a niffler in his satchel, while Parvati and Lavender were comparing glittery ink signatures. Harry kept his hands in his lap. McGonagall moved down the Gryffindor table like a solemn librarian on a tight schedule, collecting each form with a brief nod and a flick of her quill. When she reached Harry, her stride didn't slow. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Her eyes met his for only a moment, cool, composed, and just sharp enough to suggest she knew exactly why his hands were empty. And she moved on. "You all right?" Ron asked, quieter now. Harry nodded. "Just forgot to forge a guardian." Hermione gave him a look, but softened when she saw the flicker of hurt behind his sarcasm. "Maybe Dumbledore can override it?" "Doubt it," Harry muttered. "The Ministry's too busy pretending Voldemort never existed. Can't imagine they'll bend the rules just so I can buy a bag of exploding bonbons." Ron sighed and offered his last sausage. "I'd sneak you out if I could." "You'll try," Harry said, accepting it like a peace offering. "You'll fail, but points for loyalty." At the front of the hall, McGonagall neatly vanished the collected stack of permission slips into a waiting scroll case. "Thank you. That concludes slip collection. Enjoy your weekend." Around them, conversations resumed. Hogsmeade plans, shopping lists, gossip about who might get caught sneaking in without a slip. Harry stayed quiet, watching as Fred and George high-fived behind a levitating list of prank supply orders. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. He'd seen worse things than missing a school trip. But as the hall emptied and students filed out into the sunshine, that empty space in his pocket where the permission slip should have been felt heavier than his wand. Harry climbed the spiral staircase toward the headmaster's office, the gargoyle having leapt aside at the password "Fizzing Whizbee." The steps rotated slowly beneath him, groaning like an old beast trying to wake. As he neared the landing, a sharp voice cut through the thick oak door. "I'm not mocking him, headmaster. I'm educating them," Snape snapped. "If students are to study Wolfsbane properly, then yes, they should know the circumstances under which it's administered." "Circumstances," Dumbledore repeated softly. "Severus, you titled the sample case When a Friend is Furry at the Full Moon." "I was being efficient, informative and memorable." "You were being petty for past mistakes," Dumbledore said, voice level. "You toe a line, Severus, and whether you intend to or not, you are undermining a colleague. I must ask you to rename the project." There was a pause, a long scrape of chair legs. Then the door swung open and Snape stormed out, robes trailing like smoke behind him. He paused only to cast Harry a look of pure disdain, equal parts curiosity and contempt, then disappeared down the staircase without a word. Harry blinked. "Should I—" "Come in, Harry," Dumbledore called gently from within. The headmaster's office was exactly as Harry remembered, warm and strange, filled with silver contraptions that hummed softly like curious insects. Fawkes gave a low trill from his perch. The air smelled of cinnamon and candle wax. As Harry stepped inside, his gaze caught on a chalkboard cluttered with odd diagrams, orbiting moons, tangled equations, and concentric rune circles. A nearby orb glowed faintly, casting lunar shadows on the floor. Dumbledore followed his gaze. "A bit of theoretical work," he said as he moved to sit behind his desk. "The Ministry has expressed interest in time interference on long-term enchantments. I've been asked to provide guidance."
Harry nodded, but something nagged at him.
Dumbledore seemed to read his mind. "Miss Granger offered a few observations earlier this week. Quite sharp as always. It proved helpful." That satisfied Harry, mostly, but he didn't press. Instead, he reached into his robe and pulled out a parchment. Its corners crumpled, the ink smudged where he's handled it too often. "I know it says I need a parent or guardian's signature," he said, "but the Dursleys wouldn't. They never would. I don't really have anyone who can." Dumbledore took the parchment gently but did not sign. "I'm sorry, Harry," he said. "I cannot override the rules set by the school governors, however much I might wish to." "I figured," Harry said after a beat, folding the parchment back into his pocket. Dumbledore studied him for a moment. "You're taking this with more grace than I expected." Harry offered a half shrug. "Last time I lost my temper, I ended up on a magical triple-decker bus." A quiet smile touched Dumbledore's lips, then it faded. "I understand Cornelius Fudge spoke with you at the Leaky Cauldron." "He did," Harry said. "Said I wasn't in trouble, that I should keep my head down. But it didn't really feel like he was helping, more like managing me." Dumbledore's expression turned unreadable. "Yes, the Minister prefers to orchestrate headlines rather than confront realities, especially those he cannot control." "He told the Prophet to leave me alone," Harry added. "Said I could go anywhere in Diagon Alley, but not to draw attention, and that if anything unusual happened, I should report it." "Did he define unusual?" Harry shook his head. "Not really. Just told me not to be clever." "That must have been difficult for you," Dumbledore said dryly. Harry gave the barest smirk. A silence stretched between them, soft and humming with things unsaid. Finally, Harry murmured, "It's not the trip, really. It's just everyone else gets to go, do something normal, walk around a village, laugh, buy sweets, and I'm stuck here, again. Isn't that unusual?" "Hogsmeade means more than you realise," Dumbledore said gently. "It is freedom, yes, but also connection, joy. And it is unusual you have been denied too much of both." "I don't want pity," Harry muttered. "Then take hope," Dumbledore replied. "You may yet find ways to make your own Hogsmeade." Harry didn't know what that meant, but something about it stuck. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled faintly. "I imagine the twins might share that sentiment." Harry gave a small, dry laugh. "They usually do." He stood to leave, and Dumbledore raised a hand briefly. "If the loneliness becomes too sharp, my door is open." Harry nodded once, then turned and let the door click shut behind him.
A week later. The air in the dungeon was thick with steam and the faint scent of damp stone and singed herbs. Cauldrons bubbled at every station, and the clink of glass stirred in rhythmic waves as students measured, stirred, and whispered incantations. Harry adjusted his goggles, Snape's latest safety requirement, and leaned over their shared cauldron with Hermione. "Okay," Hermione said. "Distilled water, infusion of wormwood, powdered wolfsbane, carefully neutralised, and valerian root, all simmering." "Looks like muddy tea," Harry muttered. "It's not tea," Hermione snapped quietly, though not unkindly. "It's the base for a Class B transformation suppressant. This could actually stabilise the early cycle symptoms." Harry raised an eyebrow. "And you say I need hobbies?" Hermione rolled her eyes and checked her watch. 20-minute mark, time to stir. She raised her wand with a practiced flick. "Agito lenita." For a beat, the spoon floated up calmly. Then, crack. It snapped into action like it had been insulted. The spoon stirred so violently it slapped the side of the cauldron, sloshing a stream of purple brew out and directly onto Harry's robes. The liquid hissed against the fabric, leaving a sizzling stain and a slight herbal aroma. "Whoa!" Harry recoiled.
Hermione immediately grabbed the spoon with her bare hand to stop it, hissing, "Venite!" The classroom turned toward the commotion just as a silken voice slithered in from behind them. "Oh, how charming," said Professor Snape, arriving like a thunder cloud in mid-glide. "Explosive incompetence and fashion-forward potion stains. Tell me, Miss Granger, does the concept of moderation elude you entirely?" "It was a misfire," Hermione began. "Clearly. Your spoon seems more enchanted than your judgment." Harry gritted his teeth but kept quiet. Snape's gaze dropped to the smoking blotch on his robes. 10 points from Gryffindor for wasting ingredients. Hermione's shoulders stiffened beside him. Before Snape could twist the dagger further, there was a loud pop from the far corner, followed by a shriek from Neville and a whoosh of purple smoke. "Ron, what did you do?" Neville cried. "I don't know! You said clockwise! I said it was clockwise! You stirred in zodiac order! What does that even mean?" Their cauldron belched out a puff of smoke, shaped vaguely like a disgruntled goat, and collapsed inward. The class burst into coughing, wheezing chaos. Snape turned so slowly it was terrifying. "Weasley! Longbottom!" His tone was now positively silky with menace. "What inspired you to brew your potion as if it were a horoscope smoothie?" "Technically," Ron wheezed, "it's Neville's detention." "But detention?" Snape's smile was thin as a knife blade. "And if either of you even looks at a cauldron again this week, I will assign you a 12-foot scroll on why I should not be trusted with potions, glassware, or magical liquids." Neville gave a small whimper. Ron looked like he was about to argue, then caught Harry's warning glance and held it in. Snape glided off to terrorise a Slytherin pair whose flask was gently hissing. Hermione bent back their cauldron, muttering, "I don't understand. My wand work was stable this morning." Harry rubbed the potion-stained patch of his robe. "You've done that a couple times this week. Is that normal?" "Obviously not," she said briskly, but her brow furrowed, betraying her unease. "I've practiced that spell 100 times. It's supposed to be gentle, controlled." Harry looked at her more closely. Her jaw was tight, her grip on the wand stiff. The spoon still vibrated faintly where it floated. "Maybe we can go ask Lupin about it," he said quietly. Hermione paused, then gave a curt nod. "Yeah, all right." But she didn't sound convinced. Harry yanked off his stained school robes the moment he reached the changing room, stuffing them into the farthest corner of his locker like they might infect the rest of his belongings by proximity. The smell of burnt valerian and overcooked wool clung to him. He pulled on his scarlet Quidditch robes with more force than necessary, not bothering to fix the skewed collar. He didn't feel like being careful today. The small notebook Hermione had enchanted, tucked safely in his inner pocket, buzzed softly. He opened it. Her neat handwriting shimmered into view. "I'll get you new ones. Promise." He stared at it a moment, then scrawled back, a bit more sharply than intended. "Wasn't your fault. Just an accident." He shut the cover. The words vanished. Grabbing his broom, Harry stepped out onto the pitch. The air was brisk and dry. The sun was low in the sky, casting long gold shadows across the grass. Fred and George were already up high, weaving between goalposts, testing bludger responsiveness. Katie, Alicia, and Angelina flew drills below, laughing as they passed the quaffle. Harry kicked off the ground. The rush of air past his ears was welcome, familiar. For a while, it steadied him.
He made several passes around the pitch, diving and twisting, letting the wind rip the tension from his shoulders. Each spiral through the sky loosened his jaw a little more, the knots in his back unwinding with every hard cut of his broom. Fred shouted from above, "Oi, Potter! Try not to show off, we all know you're Dumbledore's favourite missile." Actually made him laugh. "Only if you're the target," Harry called back, shooting through a pair of goalposts with ease. George passed him a quaffle mid-air.
Just testing your reflexes. And Harry lobbed it backward over his shoulder, not even glancing. It landed squarely in Alicia's arms. Show off confirmed, she said, grinning as she tucked the quaffle and dove. For a few minutes, Harry let himself enjoy it. The world shrank to red robes, open sky, and the crisp cut of air against his face. No professors, no ministry, no shadows. Then, crack! A bludger tore through the air like a cannonball, curving toward him with murderous intent. Harry rolled beneath it, diving fast and low. The pitch blurred. His foot skimmed the turf and skidded, flinging up a spray of mud. He kicked off it without hesitation, pivoting into a sharp rise, clean, fluid, instinctive. Fred whooped from above. Stylish, Potter! Harry gave a half wave, but his eyes were already climbing. Some things were moving up there in the clouds. Just beyond the stadium lights, shadows flickered. Not birds, not players. Figures. Moving. Circling. Harry squinted against the sun, heart rate picking up again. The air around him turned inexplicably colder. He dipped lower, hugging the broom tighter, his body reacting before his mind caught up. There was no breeze, no wind, and yet the temperature was dropping like a trap door opening beneath his ribs. He looked up again. A vague shape, dark and wispy, elongated limbs, a head like a hound. A dog? No, a silhouette, watching him from above. Harry's stomach flipped. He blinked. Gone. Just clouds. Just light. Just sky. Was that real? He didn't have time to answer. Crack! A bludger shrieked toward him like a curse, spinning on a wild trajectory. Harry barely registered the sound before his body twisted mid-air. The black cannonball missed his face by inches, slicing past with a scream of wind and metal. Harry descended in a blur of red and wind, heart thudding with something colder than fear. Not again, he thought. Had it always been there, watching? Or was it only now that he could finally see it? He landed hard, kicking up dirt as he touched down and ripped off his gloves. His breath came fast, the cold sinking deeper than just skin. Fred's voice yelled something from above, possibly an apology, but Harry couldn't hear it properly. He'd seen things. In the clouds, in the air, in his bones. Harry, George called down. I'm fine, Harry lied. From above, Oliver Wood shouted. You all right, Potter? Harry gave a thumbs up without looking back and walked off the pitch. He walked toward the exit without looking back. The warmth of the castle felt a mile away. Behind him, laughter resumed in hesitant pockets. Brooms cut through the sky, and the evening sun turned the towers gold. But Harry didn't see any of it. The common room crackled with the soft pop of logs shifting in the fireplace. Shadows danced along the red stone walls, painting warm light over students playing wizard chess or flipping through textbooks. But Harry barely noticed any of it. His skin still felt clammy, the collar of his robes damp with sweat. The image of the shadow in the clouds, the shape of the grim, haunted the edges of his vision like a smudge he couldn't blink away. Hermione sat curled in one of the deep armchairs near the fire, a book forgotten in her lap. Her eyes locked onto him the moment he stepped through the portrait hole. Harry. He paused. Something in her voice. It wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. It felt pointed. You're afraid, she said quietly. Harry stopped in his tracks. What? Hermione stood, closing the book. "You're afraid," she repeated. Her tone was calm, but her brows were pinched like she wasn't sure why she knew it either. "What happened at practice?" Harry swallowed. Nothing. Just a long day." But even as he said it, his hand twitched slightly. Hermione's gaze flicked to it, then back up to his eyes. He forced a shaky breath. "It's stupid. I thought I saw something in the sky. A shadow, just nerves." She was silent a moment, then said, "You need to talk to Professor Lupin." Harry blinked. "Now?" Hermione nodded once. "You trust him, don't you?" "I do. Harry trailed off, then, "Yeah, all right." He headed up to the dormitory and changed into jeans and a sweater, brushing dried mud off his shoes from where he'd skidded on the pitch. His limbs still felt leaden. He grabbed his wand and headed back down, where Hermione was already waiting near the portrait hole. As they turned to leave, Ron's voice cut across the room. "Oi, Harry!" Ron jogged up to them, parchment in hand. "You still want to do the divination homework together? You said tonight, remember?" Harry froze mid-step. Right, I did. Sorry, Ron. I completely forgot." Ron looked confused. "You all right?" "Yeah," Harry said quickly. "Just something happened at practice. Unexplained later." He turned back to the portrait hole. Ron opened his mouth, but Harry was already stepping through, Hermione behind him. The door swung closed with a soft thud. Ron stood for a second, holding the parchment limply, then walked back to the empty table. The corridor outside Professor Lupin's office was quiet. Too quiet, Harry thought. The only sound was the soft scuff of their shoes on the stone floor and the distant echo of a shifting suit of armour. The torchlight flickered against the heavy wooden door, which looked even older up close, its iron handle worn smooth by decades of anxious students. Hermione raised a hand to knock, but Lupin's voice called out before she touched it. "Come in!" The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit office that smelled faintly of mint tea and old books. Maps of magical creature habitats lined the walls, alongside shelves of well-thumbed defense manuals and curious trinkets. A cracked sneakoscope, a jar of silver powder, and a fanged compass that kept spinning even while resting. Lupin sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled, quill in hand. He looked up with that same gentle, worn smile Harry had come to find oddly reassuring. "Evening," he said, setting the quill aside. "Should I be concerned, or are you here to save me from grading?" Hermione smiled faintly. Harry didn't. "I saw something," he said. Lupin studied him for a moment. "Tell me." Harry stepped forward, suddenly unsure how to say it without sounding mad. During Quidditch practice, in the sky, it looked like a dog. Black, huge. I don't know, it wasn't there, and then it was. Hermione stood beside him, arms crossed but not defensive, protective. "It wasn't just a trick of the clouds," Harry added. "I felt it, cold, like the Dementor on the train, and then a bludgeon nearly took my head off." Lupin's expression didn't change, but the flick of his eyes was sharp, calculating. He stood and moved to the nearby fireplace, where a small kettle sat on a hovering stand. "I believe tea is in order." "I'm not thirsty," Harry said. "It's not for thirst," Lupin said softly. He poured 2 cups anyway and handed it to them. There was a silence while the 3 of them sipped. Then Lupin, casually, said, "You know, I once had a divination professor insist I had a bright future because she saw a pineapple in my cup. Claimed it meant fortune through unlikely friendships." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Did it?" "Well, I met your father 2 days later and lost 10 house points in the first 5 minutes, so maybe." He smiled wryly, then nodded to Harry's cup. "Go on. Let's see what fate's brewing for you." Harry glanced at Hermione, who gave a tiny shrug. With a sigh, he tilted the cup, revealing the damp clump of leaves near the bottom. Lupin leaned in, eyes half-lidded behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Interesting. Do you see that smudge there? Bit like a dog, isn't it? Harry stiffened. Lupin noticed, but his voice stayed calm, almost playful. Or a blob, if you're less poetically inclined. But perhaps it's more about what you think it looks like. I've seen something like that before, Harry said quietly. In the clouds, in the stars. During practice today, in the sky. It felt like it was watching me. Hermione looked at him sharply. Lupin's tone softened. Seeing patterns in uncertainty is a very human thing, Harry. It doesn't mean they're real, but it can mean something is weighing on you. Harry didn't answer. Fear doesn't always show up in obvious forms, Lupin continued. Sometimes it looks like shapes in the clouds. Sometimes it feels like cold air when no one's around. You had more than your fair share of shadows, Harry. It's not weakness to admit they're getting to you. Harry looked down at the cup again. The wet leaves swirled slightly, forming nothing and everything. I thought I was just imagining it, he said. You might have been, Lupin said gently, but your imagination, like your instincts, is worth listening to. Just don't let it rule you. Harry nodded. Lupin sat back in his chair, folding his hands. Miss Granger, something's on your mind. She hesitated, then set her cup down with a soft clink. I've been meaning to say something about my magic. Harry looked over sharply. She hadn't mentioned this before. It's not just the usual stuff, she said quickly, sensing his reaction. It's changed, a little, since last year. Lupin's expression shifted subtly, calm but more alert. How so? He asked gently.
Hermione brushed a curl behind her ear, gathering her thoughts. Well, it's hard to describe. Spells I've always cast, charms, transfigurations, they're stronger now, but erratic. Sometimes they just burst, like the spell I used in potions today. It should have stirred the cauldron, not nearly flung it across the table.
Lupin nodded slowly. Any other moments?
Yes, it only seems to happen when I'm, well, tense or emotional, but only sometimes and only around. She faltered, then looked at Harry. Around you.
Harry blinked. What?
I know it sounds odd, she said quickly, but every time I've lost control like that, you've been near. It's not your fault. I don't even think it's about you. It's just something happens.
Lupin stood and walked over to the chalkboard, now covered with unrelated ministry equations. He tapped a finger lightly against the edge of it, as if thinking would make the formulas shift to match her words. That's highly unusual, he said, but not unheard of. There are cases, very rare, of magical resonance between witches and wizards, usually between bonded pairs, but that's a much older kind of magic, difficult to quantify, he added quickly, at the look that flashed across both their faces. It's not just that, Hermione said, voice dropping. There were spells I used last year while under its influence. She meant the diary, and they both knew it. They weren't mine, but they came from me. Lupin turned, face now deeply serious. And since then, you think something's remained? I feel different, she admitted. More precise, maybe, sharper, but also like something's echoing when I cast, like I'm not always alone in the spell. Harry's hand curled slightly around his empty cup. He remembered the way the diary had twisted things, twisted her. The thought of it lingering, even in traces, made his stomach turn. Lupin exhaled slowly. You may be describing a form of magical aftershock, a residue from dark contact. And if your magic is resonating when Harry is nearby, well, that could suggest a connection deeper than any of us understood. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Lupin said, You should speak with Professor Dumbledore. I don't say that lightly. He knows more about ancient magic than anyone alive. Hermione nodded, her voice soft. I didn't want to make it a thing. Lupin offered a reassuring smile. You didn't, but it already is. That doesn't make it dangerous, but it does make it worth understanding. Thanks, Professor, Harry said, his voice low. Any time, Lupin replied, then added more softly. And, Harry, next time the shadows look too close, come find me before you try flying through them.
A faint, crooked smile from Harry.
Yes, sir. As they stepped out into the corridor, the air felt cooler, sharper. The kind of air that made things echo. And behind them, Lupin stood at the window, watching the sky above the forbidden forest, where the moon shined above. The air had turned crisp with the arrival of October. Golden leaves drifted across the castle grounds, catching in corners of stone staircases and windowsills like forgotten parchment scraps. Inside, the castle had taken on its usual autumn hush. Thicker jumpers, steaming mugs at breakfast, and essays piling up like the first signs of frost. It was Thursday afternoon, and Defence Against the Dark Arts was their last class of the day. But as the trio filed into the classroom, the usual calm presence of Professor Lupin was conspicuously absent. At the front of the room stood Professor Snape, arms crossed, lips pursed in what could only be described as grim satisfaction. A hush fell over the class. Take your seats, he said coldly. Professor Lupin is indisposed. No one dared ask what that meant. With a flick of his wand, the chalkboard scrawled itself alive in his precise angular script. Dark Creatures Unit. Lecture 1. Werewolves. Hermione's hand went up before Harry could even blink. Professor, aren't we skipping ahead? The syllabus doesn't cover werewolves until after Grindylows and Kappas. Snape's smile didn't reach his eyes. Professor Lupin has left me no instructions, Miss Granger. I am simply making efficient use of the time. Harry exchanged a look with Ron, who muttered, Right, efficient. Snape's eyes swept across the room. Open your copies of Beasts Below the Blood Moon, page 394. Books flipped open and quills scratched hurriedly as Snape launched into a dry, clinical explanation of werewolf physiology. His tone was devoid of compassion, his language detached. He emphasized instability, uncontrollability, and danger. It felt more like a condemnation than a lesson. As you will read, he said, the transformation is not merely painful, it is dehumanizing. The werewolf loses all sense of identity. It is a creature of instinct and bloodlust, a risk to itself and to anyone foolish enough to be nearby. He paused meaningfully, letting his words settle like frost on stone. For your assignment, Snape continued, you will work in pairs to write a 2-foot parchment, a summary of werewolf behavioural traits during transformation, and an assessment of how magical society has responded, poorly or otherwise. Due in 1 week.
Chairs scraped as students began shuffling around, looking for partners.
Hermione instantly stepped toward Harry. We should compare this with the Ananagus readings, she whispered, already flipping through her notes. Ron blinked. Oh, but I thought I could be... Never mind. He ended up beside Neville again, who offered a nervous thumbs up. Hey, at least we're consistent, Ron sighed. In misery. Snape's eyes locked on Harry. You, Potter, may wish to consult sources outside the Quidditch pitch. I'm told broomsticks aren't known for their academic insight. Harry scowled. Sir, the first Quidditch game is tomorrow. Is it really fair to assign that much work with no notice? Snape's lips curled. I fail to see how your extracurricular pursuits are my concern. Professor Lupin always gives us time to prepare. I am not Professor Lupin, Snape snapped. And contrary to popular belief, I do not hand out extensions for students with inflated egos and a penchant for theatrics. Harry flushed. fists clenched to his sides. Snape's voice lowered, venomous now. You may have inherited your father's talent for flying, Otter, but I see you've also inherited his arrogance. The room went utterly silent. Ron muttered something foul under his breath. Hermione shot Harry a look that was half warning, half worried, but Harry didn't respond. He just gritted his teeth and copied the assignment instructions down onto his parchment, the quill shaking slightly in his hand. The bell rang moments later. As students began filing out, Ron muttered, "Someone ought to turn him into a werewolf and see how it feels." Hermione didn't reply. She was too busy glancing sideways at Harry, who hadn't said a word since Snape's remark.
The sky above Hogwarts was a bruised slate, churning with clouds that threatened war. Rain lashed the pitchen sheets, pounding against the stands and drenching the students who had enchanted umbrellas or simply braved the weather with Gryffindor scarves wrapped tight to their chins. Harry stood beside Oliver Wood and the rest of the team in the tunnel, dripping and squinting through the downpour. Across the pitch, the Hufflepuff team huddled in their butter-yellow robes, looking like soaked sunflowers in a storm. Cedric Diggory, tall and calm beneath the weight of the rain, caught Harry's eye. He gave a nod, sincere, not smug. "Good luck," he called. Harry blinked through his wet fringe. "You too." Then the whistle blew, and Harry kicked off hard, the wind immediately tearing at his robes as the sky swallowed him whole. Rain slammed into him sideways, soaking him to the skin within seconds, but he gritted his teeth and pressed upward. The pitch below was a whirlpool of motion, chasers weaving, beaters swerving, rain and wind making every move treacherous. A bludger shot through the air like a cannonball, just missing Angelina Johnson's broom before Fred sent it ricocheting towards the Hufflepuff beaters. Up higher, Cedric Diggory arced across the field with liquid control, cutting diagonally through a gust like he belonged in storm. His broom dipped with the wind, then twisted into a tight spiral before levelling out in a flash of yellow and black. He had grace. Harry had grit. Harry surged forward, diving into a barrel roll to avoid a rogue bludger that shot toward his knee. The roll pitched him sideways, hard, but he tucked into it, flinging water from his hair and rising again with a jagged burst of speed. The rain hammered harder. Then Harry saw it, a flicker of gold at the edge of his vision. He leaned into a dive so sharp it bent the nimbus like a bowstring. He flattened against the handle, eye legs locked on the snitch, darting just above the Hufflepuff goalpost. The wind screamed in his ears. The stands blurred into streaks of grey and maroon. Thunder boomed above. Cedric was already moving, closing in from the left. They were neck and neck. Below them, a bludger zigzagged across the pitch, chasing a chaser like a possessed wasp. Another shot upward, straight at Harry. He banked under Cedric at the last second, so close their boots scraped, and rolled beneath the bludger, letting it tear past his shoulder and slam into a support beam with a wet clang. Cedric glanced down, a quick look of surprise and respect, before locking back on the snitch. It zipped into a curtain of mist and vanished. Breathing hard, Harry pulled up, only to freeze. High above, black against black, was a silhouette. Not a player, not a broom. A shape. Canine, massive, motionless, watching. The Grim. The lightning flash confirmed it. A dog, looming in the clouds, gone an instant later. Harry's gut twisted, his grip slipped, the world spun, and cold poured over him. Not the cold of rain, not the chill of fear, the cold of absence. A shiver crawled across his ribs, his breath turned to fog. From the eastern edge of the pitch, out of the clouds they came, Dementors. Not one, a dozen. Gliding, slow and soundless, rain parted around them as if it dared not touch. Below, the crowd was screaming.
Madam Hooch blew her whistle over and over, but the sound barely reached Harry. Because he was falling, the scream pierced him again, rising out of the cold. Then, darkness. The light was soft and gold when Harry stirred, a complete betrayal of the storm he remembered. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then the apes settled in. His back throbbed. His shoulder felt like it had been dragged by a hippogriff. His mouth was dry as parchment. He blinked, and a blurry face leaned over him. "Oh, thank goodness," Hermione said, voice tight with relief. "You're awake." She immediately pressed a cup of water into his hands and gently slipped his glasses onto his face. "Drink slowly." Harry took a sip, coughing once. "What happened?" "You fell," said a voice from nearby. "About 50 feet. He turned. Cedric Diggory stood at the foot of the bed, soaked broom in one hand, or what was left of it. The splinters were wrapped together like a bouquet of snapped bones. "Your broom didn't make it," Cedric said gently, placing the remains on the table beside him. "It blew into the Whomping Willow. I tried to—" He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Harry." Harry didn't answer. He stared at the twisted wreckage, stomach hollowing. "I didn't catch the snitch, by the way," Cedric added. "Madam Hooch called the match. I agree, it wouldn't be right. My dad thought otherwise." Harry looked at him, surprised. Cedric just shrugged. Didn't feel like a win. Before Harry could respond, the doors burst open with a creak of protest and a swirl of maroon and gold. Fred, George, Ron, Angelina, Alicia, Katie, and Wood crowded in, all talking over each other. "You're alive! You scared the life out of us! Mate, that fall! You nearly kissed the grass with your face! We thought you'd be a Harry-shaped pancake!" Wood grabbed his hand, eyes fierce. "That was the best flying I've ever seen, Potter. Don't you dare think otherwise." "He dodged a bludger while upside down in a crosswind," George said. "Then did a reverse spin dive past Diggory," Fred added. "And still had time to hallucinate death dogs." "Top form," Hermione folded her arms, but didn't argue. She was too busy quietly adjusting Harry's blanket, trying to hide the fact that her hands were trembling. "I'm okay," Harry muttered, though the truth was less convincing. He wasn't sure what terrified him more, the Grim or the Dementors that followed. The room fell quiet as the door opened once again. Dumbledore stepped in. Gone was the twinkle in his eye. His expression was carved from stone. Behind him, Madame Pomfrey trailed like a storm cloud with a clipboard, scowling at the number of visitors. "Everyone out," she began to say, but Dumbledore raised a hand. "Just a moment." The headmaster's gaze swept the room, resting briefly on Harry, then on the ruined broom. "There will be consequences," he said softly. "Dementors entered the pitch, without permission, in violation of explicit orders." He looked at Harry. "And you paid the price." "I'm fine," Harry started. "No, you are not," Dumbledore said, voice still gentle but suddenly thunderous beneath. "And neither is this school, if this is what we now allow." The room held its breath. Then, Madame Pomfrey cleared her throat in the uncomfortable silence. "Right then, visiting hours are over." The team filed out slowly, offering Harry lofty smiles and promises of victory in the next match. Cedric lingered by the door. Speak for you there, a nod. Only Hermione remained. Harry looked at her. "You don't have to. I'm not leaving you alone," she said simply. "Not after yesterday." Harry sank back into the pillow. Outside, the sun gleamed off the storm-washed windows, and somewhere, far off, the Grim waited.